Hi, and welcome back to the Introduction to Dreamweaver series. In the last video, we went ahead and set up the basic HTML structure and added some content to our sample project. In this video, what I want to do is begin to introduce you to what CSS is and how we use it to both format the content on our page and also position the different elements on our page. So let's go ahead and get started. Now I'm going to go ahead and create a new site to do this exercise lesson in. So I'm going to go ahead and come up here to the Site menu and select New Site. I'm just going to call this CSS Test. You could call this whatever you want. And then I'm going to go ahead and set up a local site folder for this by clicking the little yellow folder icon right here. And I'm going to go ahead and go to my desktop and create a new folder to put my website in. If you already had a folder, you could choose that, but the folder should be empty. So I'll go ahead and click Create New Folder here, and I'm going to name that CSS Test. And again, the site and the folder can be named anything you want. And I'll double click on that to go into it. It should say Select CSS Test right up here at the top, or whatever you called your folder. And then I'll go ahead and click Select and Save. And I've successfully created another site in Dreamweaver. And you can see I could click this drop down arrow here, and if I wanted to, I could go back into our Shears project site just by clicking there, or click that drop down and go back into CSS Test. So you can have as many sites set up inside of Dreamweaver as you want. Later I'm going to show you how to remove these sites also. Now I'm going to go ahead and create two files. I want to create an HTML file, and then I'm going to create the CSS file that we're going to attach to it. So I'm going to come up here to Site and right click, and you'll see the option here for New File. I'll select New File, and I'm simply going to call this index.html. So I have my HTML page set up. The next thing I need to do is create another new file by right-clicking up here at the top folder, and I'm going to call that styles.css. So I need to delete the HTML extension there. So I just call this styles.css. So now I have an HTML file and I have a CSS file that I can attach to it. I'm going to go ahead and open up my HTML file, and you'll see that it's blank. But when I look in code view, you'll see Dreamweaver has set some sort of boilerplate HTML text up here for me, and I'm going to leave that alone. What I am going to do, though, is I am going to go ahead and hit Enter here a couple times just to space this out. And you'll remember from our HTML video that the head section contains instructions for the browser, whereas the body section right here is going to contain the content that the user is going to see. Now, the way HTML and CSS work is this. You place your content and your structure inside of your HTML file. You then place all of your formatting information, which includes not only the way you want to format the content, the fonts, the sizes, the colors, things like that, but also how you want to position the elements. So HTML takes care of creating the structure and holding your content, whereas the CSS holds all of your formatting, all your styling information. So the two are always going to be separate from one another. And again, there are lots of reasons why you want to do that. Probably the most important for you right now is going to be that it makes search engine optimization much easier. So we've separated our HTML from our CSS. So we have these two files right now. How do we connect them? How do we tell this HTML file to go look at a particular CSS file to find the formatting and presentation information? And the answer is we're going to link the two. And since this is something the browser needs, not some content the user is going to, that's going to be displayed to the user, we're going to put the link to the style sheet in the head section right here. So I'm going to go ahead and click after title, and that gives me room to go ahead and type in the link tag. And after the link tag, you're going to go ahead and put 4 different attributes in this tag. You remember we had tag names, and then tags could have attributes that tell us certain things about that tag. Well, the first thing that obviously I need to tell the link tag is what it's linking to. And the attribute that I use for that is called href. And you'll see if I just start typing hr, it brings up that href attribute for me in this little hint. I can then just press enter and it completes it. And also puts the equal sign and the double quotation marks in for me. Now, I could type the path in here just like I could type the path in for an image or for a link. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the browse option here. Just press enter to bring up my file picker. And you'll see here's my CSS test site. There's my style sheet that I'm going to attach to. I click on that and then click OK. And it went ahead and put that in there. Since my style sheet and my file are kept in the same folder, they're right in the root directory, there is no path information. It's just putting the name of the file right there. So that's the first attribute. The next attribute you need to do is you need to tell it what kind of link this is. And you do that with the relationship or REL attribute. And the proper value to set for your relationship attribute is going to be style sheet. You'll see I selected that right there and I hit enter and it fills that in for me. Now there are multiple kinds of style sheets in existence. So you need to tell the browser not only where the style sheet is and that it's a style sheet, you need to say what type of style sheet it is. And that's going to be accomplished by using the type attribute. And you'll see I began to type the name there and it brought up that little tooltip. I can press enter and it goes ahead and gives me the values. And in this case, it is a text-based CSS style sheet, not a JavaScript style sheet. So I'm going to go ahead and hit enter there, and that filled in that value for me. The fourth and final attribute that you need to set up for your style sheet is the media attribute. And I'll go ahead and type that, and again, the tooltip brings that up for me. I just hit enter. And then I choose what I want, which in this case, this is a screen style sheet. And most of your style sheets are going to be for on-screen presentation. Probably the most used style sheet type after that, I shouldn't say type, but media type after that is a print style sheet, which allows you to control how a page is printed, whereas this allows you to control how a page is displayed on the screen. I'm going to go ahead and type space, and I'm sorry, I'm just going to go ahead and type a closing bracket there. Whoops, wrong item there. And you'll see that it went ahead and closed that link attribute. So, or the link tag. So you can see here, I've linked this index.html page to my styles.css page. And I'm going to go ahead and save that. And normally, Dreamweaver shows any related files up here in the title bar. Now, if I was to close this and reopen it, those would appear. But if you don't want to do that, you can go to View, and if you come all the way down to Related Files, and actually this is going to be off the window, you're going to come all the way down to the View menu. You're going to see Related File Options. And on a submenu that jumps out, it's going to say Refresh Related Files. You want to go ahead and click that. And again, I'm sorry that the video window isn't large enough to show you this. When I do that, you're going to see that a new bar appeared up here. And I can see that I've successfully attached to that styles.css sheet. So I can switch in between my source code and my style sheet just by clicking back and forth, just like that. So I've successfully attached to that sheet. If you got something wrong here, when you clicked on styles.css, it will give you some sort of an error. You won't actually see your style sheet right here. And again, if I was to directly open this style sheet up. I went ahead and double clicked on that in the Files panel, and I'm just going to type Edit here just to put something in there. When I come back into my index.html and look at my style sheet, that's there. So it's just two ways of looking at the exact same file. Now, I'm going to go ahead and just put a couple pieces of text into my HTML document here. I want to do a heading. I'm going to do H1 here. And I'm going to go ahead and type Welcome to my web page. And then I'm going to go ahead and close that tag. And then I'm going to go ahead and put a paragraph in. And I'm going to say this is a sample paragraph. And then I'm going to close that p tag. So right now, very simple document. You can see here just a heading and a paragraph of text. Now, if I want to format that, let me go ahead and back up. Let's go ahead and talk about the CSS. And actually, let me back up a little bit further because I did this rather quickly. Originally, we were in code view here for my HTML page. What I did is I clicked on Split right here. And what that's doing is it's showing me the code view here, and it's showing me my web page right here in Design View. And actually, it's in Live View, Design View right over here. If I want to see the code for a different page, like not the HTML, if I want to see the CSS, I just click right there. So now you can see I can go back and forth between my HTML code and my CSS code, and I can still see the way the page appears right over here. So that's a really, really useful feature inside of Dreamweaver when you're learning or when you're trying to see what how changes you make in your CSS affect your HTML. Now, CSS styles come in three different varieties. There are what are called tag styles, there are class styles, and there are ID styles. These all follow the same basic rules, but they affect your HTML a little bit differently. So again, right now, just remember there are three different types of styles: tag styles, class styles, and ID styles. And you're going to use all of them when you're creating your CSS sheet. A tag style, or your HTML page, a tag style is simply a tag with some instructions on it. So we see here, this heading here is formatted with the H1 tag. You'll see I have H1 here, and that's formatting this block of text. Now, right now, this is just whatever the browser default is, because we haven't given the browser any instructions for how to format an H1 tag. So I'm going to come over here into my CSS, and I'm going to go ahead and type H1. In CSS terms, we call that a selector. The H1, we're selecting any text that has the H1 tag attached to it. Then I'm going to go ahead and do a little curly bracket right here. And the curly bracket goes ahead and it says all of these rules should be applied to the H1 tag, or everything in between these brackets. So I'm going to go ahead and just hit enter a couple times and close my curly bracket. So you can see I've got an opening curly bracket and a closing curly bracket. And anything in between is going to be applied to my H1 tag. Now, there are hundreds of different properties that you can specify in a CSS statement. In this case, I want to do three things. I want to set the font size, and the font color for my H1 tag. So the first property that I'm going to go ahead and do is font-family. And again, these attributes you're going to learn, these properties you're going to learn as we go through our project. If you want a more complete explanation of all the CSS rules for selectors and all the different properties, there's a separate video series that covers CSS in some detail. But you'll get enough CSS in this series that you can do most things that you want with CSS. So you'll see it brought up font family, and it's going to go ahead and ask me what font I want to use for this text. Now, we all know that not every computer has the same set of fonts on it. For example, if you're on a Windows machine, probably the most common font that's used is one called Times New Roman. But Times New Roman doesn't exist on Macintosh computers. They have a font that's exactly the same as that called Times. So the same font just has two different names. If you are on a Linux computer, there's a font called Serif that you could use. So how do we specify different fonts based on different browsers or different computers? And the answer is we specify a font family right here. And you can see the order here: Courier New, Courier, Monospace. Or the example that I gave earlier, Times New Roman, Times, and Serif. Or, again, on a Macintosh, we don't have Arial like we do on Windows computers. We have a font called Helvetica on a Mac. So what I want to do is I'm going to select Arial, Helvetica, Sans Serif as the font family. I'm going to go ahead and move this over just a little bit so you can see that whole thing. So, and then I'm going to go ahead and complete this statement with a semicolon. Now, again, go through this. H1 is the selector. After H1, we put a double curly bracket, an opening curly bracket and a closing curly bracket. You then have a rule inside of the curly brackets. This is called a CSS statement, or a property value statement. Font family is the property, and when you hear the word property, just think about attribute. It's an attribute. It's a characteristic of something. So we have the property, and then we have the value that we want to assign to the property. In this case, the property is what font are we using, and the value is Arial, or the other fonts that are listed here. And you can see my font has changed over here in my sample. Now, right now we just have one rule inside of, one other thing. After you complete your property value statement, you always end it with a semicolon. So always put a semicolon on the end. And again, you can see that that's been applied over here. Now, we just have one property value statement in this CSS rule. But I can click at the end of that one and hit enter and type in another rule. In this case, I want to specify the font size. So I'm going to go ahead and do font-size. And then a colon. A colon always separates the property from the value you're assigning to the property. And now I go ahead and specify how tall I want, or what size I want that font to be. Now, font sizes on web pages are different than font sizes on a printed page. Font sizes on a printed page are usually measured in points. So if we go to like Microsoft Word, we would want 12-point font for like a standard body font. Since this is going to be displayed on the screen, we don't measure things in points. We measure things in pixels. And you can see here the different pixel values. Now, you can type in whatever you want here. For example, I can go ahead and say I want this to be 21 pixels. And the ending for pixels is px. And then I type a semicolon. And if I click over here, you can see that heading became smaller. It's now 21 pixels high. I could change that to 33 pixels. And you'll see it gets larger. So you just have to choose the font size that you want, remembering that you're measuring things in pixels instead of points. Now, think back a little bit ago when we were doing the link between the HTML and the CSS sheet. We applied that media attribute. And the media attribute, that the value we gave to the media attribute was screen. If we had if we were creating a print style sheet as opposed to a style sheet that's meant to display a page on the screen, we would be using points for our font size. So it all depends on the medium that you're using the style sheet for, a printed page or on screen. The final property that I'm going to go ahead and specify for my H1s is going to be the color attribute. So I'm going to go ahead and do color here, and you're going to have to enter in either the RGB values or the hexadecimal color values for the colors that you want to use. Now, fortunately, Dreamweaver's hints here really help us out, because instead of having to know what the exact value is, I can just come down here and click on or select color. And when I do that, you're just going to see this color prism appears that gives you all these standard colors. If this isn't enough for you, if you click this little wheel right here, you get this color prism right here that'll let you select almost any color that you can imagine. And in my case, I want to make my fonts blue, so I'm going to go ahead and select that color blue there. You could adjust the brightness or the contrast right over here. And when I click OK, you can see it put in the hexadecimal color value that represents that blue. There's more to specifying colors than what I'm just showing you here now. And again, that CSS series goes into details about how you specify colors. So I went ahead and ended that property value statement with a semicolon. And when I click over here, you can see that font color changed. If I was to come in here again and delete all that and go back into my color option, I could select another color. Let's say I wanted a dark red. I could select that dark red, fine tune it right over here, and when I click OK, it's going to put that value for red in there. And this is a hexadecimal number, meaning that it's base 16 as opposed to base 10, which means we do have some letters in here for our color code. And again, I end that with a semicolon. When I click over here, you'll see that has been, the font color there has been changed. So that's your first rule that we've created for the H1 tag. We specified the font size, and the font color. We can do the same thing here for our paragraph. Now, this paragraph of text isn't in an H1 tag. If we go ahead and look at the source code, it's inside of a P tag here. So I'm going to come back into my style sheet, and I'm going to go ahead and type P. That's the name of the tag that's it's inside. And then I'm going to go ahead and do that opening curly bracket, hit enter a couple times, and then do a closing curly bracket. And again, anything in between those opening and closing curly brackets is going to affect this text right here because it's in a P tag. These are tag styles. So I'm going to go ahead and click over here, and I'm going to do the exact same thing. I'm going to do font family. And this time I'm going to go ahead and make it Courier just to make it something different. Font size, I'm going to go ahead and make it 12 pixels. And the color, I'm going to go ahead, and you don't have to pick something from the wheel here. I could type in any value I want. For instance, I could do 23 or 34 C 3 D 8. And I have to remember to end that with a semicolon. And I'll save it and click over here, and you can see the color that was changed there. Obviously, you don't want to type in any random numbers, but as you begin to learn more and more about CSS, you're going to sort of memorize what these codes are and the colors that you like using, and you can just type them in there. I'm going to go ahead and select something a little bit darker there. I'm going to select this dark blue color. And you can see that's represented by just a 3-digit code. And there is that color. And if you can't see it very well, I could go ahead and make it like 18 points. And there I go. If I wanted to change the font weight, I could go ahead and do font weight. And I'm going to go ahead and make it bold. So I went ahead and made that bold. If I wanted to make it italic, that would be the font style. So I went ahead and said font style, colon, italic, close the statement with a semicolon, and now it's italicized. So these rules allow you to format this text. Now, the next type of style that you can create is called a class style. And I'm actually going to go ahead and change this back to the way I kind of had it originally. I'm going to make that 12 points. I'm going to take these off here. And this time what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to come back into my CSS styles. Oh, there we go. Sorry about that. And I want to create a style that's not associated with a tag. That way I can apply it wherever I want. And I'm just simply going to call this one blue. And again, you can name your styles whatever you want. And then I'm going to go ahead and put the double curly brackets, the opening and the closing curly brackets. And I'm just going to go ahead and specify the color as this color right here. So that's a class style. Whenever I apply the class blue to anything, it's going to change that font. Now I'm going to go ahead and delete these two color statements up here. And you can see this is going to go back to just the browser default black. And I'm going to make that a little bit larger, increase it to 14 points, just so we can see a little bit better. Now, to apply this rule, or when we set up these rules, they were automatically applied to the proper text over here because we already had applied these tags to these pieces of content. But there is no blue anywhere in here. So the computer isn't applying, or the browser isn't applying this blue class to anything right now. But what I can do is I can come in here, and after the H1, I'm going to go ahead and type class. And the value that I'm going to give for the class is going to be blue. So this H1 now has a class of blue associated with it. So when we look at our styles, two rules are going to be applied to this text up here. The H1 rule and the class rule blue. So it's going to apply both of these, this rule and this rule, to this piece of text. And when I click over here, you're going to see, whoops, I need to refresh here. You're going to see if something doesn't come up over here, if you make a change over in your style sheet and it isn't applied over here, this little button right here is refresh, and that will refresh your design view here, and you will see that that blue has been applied there. If I was to change that to, let's say, F00, it would become red. And there I go, I've got a red headline, even though this is called blue. Your class styles can be named anything you want at all. You can only use one word. If you need to use multiple words, you could go ahead and use hyphens or dashes in between the words, but you can't have any spaces. So I could call this Bob if I wanted to. Go ahead and save that and come back over here, and you'll see this is returned to black because I changed the name of my class to Bob. And when I look, when I look in my source code here, you can see the class of blue has still been applied there. But if I change that to Bob, then that rule is going to be applied to that piece of text. Now, this brings up an interesting point. What if there's a conflict between rules? What if the H1 rule is saying one thing and the class rule here is saying another? For example, right now this class style, I'm just calling Bob, specifies that the font color should be red. What if I went ahead up here and did a font color of blue. And I can do a simple blue by doing 0FF. I'm sorry, 00F. And again, ending that with a semicolon. When I click over here, you're going to see there's no change. And that's because the CSS rules are always going to be applied in the order that it finds them in the style sheet here. So it found the H1 rule first, and it applied the blue color here. But then it found Bob, which has also been applied to that text, and it applied the color, whoops, sorry about that, it applied the color red to that piece of text. So there is an order of things being applied, and rules can override one another depending upon their position in the style sheet. So that's a very basic introduction to class styles and also tag styles. And again, this wasn't meant to teach you everything about CSS. As we go through the process of setting up the page for the project we're working on, you'll learn more of these properties and more of these values that you can apply. But there's one other type of style that we can create, and that's called an ID style. An ID style. And I'm going to go ahead and switch into my project again. So you can go ahead and click back in your project, and I'm going to go ahead and open up my main document. That was the document that we were working on. And again, you're going to see the design view over here and your code view right over here. If I scroll down, remember we gave all of these divs IDs. So this division or this section of code has the ID logo. This section of code has the ID social media icons. Not only can you use, and I'm going to go ahead and close that and come back into my sample file. Not only can you use CSS styles to format things, you can also use CSS styles to position things. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to go ahead and change the way some of these things are laid out. Now, actually, I need some more text in here, so I'm going to go ahead and open that main back up. I'm in Shears Design here. I'm going to go ahead and open that up, and I'm going to go into Code View, scroll down, and there's a long paragraph of text. I'm going to go, and a couple of images, but I'm just going to go ahead and highlight what for me is line 62. It's just the P tag with this filler text in it. I'm going to go ahead and highlight that and copy it. And then I'm going to close that page, go back into my source code, and now I'm going to go ahead and paste this in here. Oops, got that indented a little bit far. Go ahead and delete that space and save this. And now I've got a block of text there. And I'm going to go into Design View so you can see this a little bit easier. What if I wanted this block of text to be smaller than what it's being displayed at right now? By default, my divs are going to expand out to fill the full width of the available page. I'm going to come back in here to my style sheet, and I'm going to be in Code View for this. And I'm going to actually, I'm sorry I jumped ahead there a little bit, go into the source code for this page right here. And what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to hit enter there a couple times, and I'm going to go ahead and put the tag div with an ID of text. And again, I can call that whatever I want, and then I need to close my tag after that. So this block of text here is contained in a div or in a division with the ID text on it. Now I'm going to come back into my style sheet, and I'm going to go into Code View. To specify an ID, what you're going to do is you're going to go ahead and type a number sign. And that actually brings up something I forgot a little bit earlier. When we created this class style, class styles always begin with a period. Class styles always begin with a period, and then you have the name of the class. Tag styles are just the tag. So tag styles, you just type the tag, H1, P, whatever. Class styles always begin with a period. ID styles, or styles that are attached to an ID in your HTML, always begin with a number sign. And I'm going to go ahead and call that text, because that's the name of that div, or the ID of that div was text. Then I'm going to go ahead and do my opening bracket and my closing bracket. Save that. Anything I place in here inside of this CSS rule is going to be applied to the div text. So let's say I don't want this block of text to go all the way across the page. I can go ahead and use the CSS property width. And I'm going to specify the width of that as being 500 pixels, 500 px. And again, I end that with a semicolon, and I separate my property from my value with a colon. I'm going to go ahead and save that. When we come into Design View, you're going to see, when I refresh, got to hit that refresh button up there sometimes, this block of text has now been constrained into a 500 pixel wide div. So you most commonly use tag and class styles to specify the formatting attributes of something. You usually specify ID styles as being the positioning, the way something is positioned. Let's go ahead and do that one more time. Only this time what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm actually going to come into my source code here, and I'm going to go ahead and copy this whole block, and I'm going to go ahead and paste it in again. And I'm going to go ahead and call this one box 1 and box 2. Save that. When we look in Design View, I now have 2 blocks of text here. And I'm going to go ahead now and make this CSS style box 1. And I'm going to do the exact same thing for the CSS style box 2. And again, I'm just copying and pasting this here. Only box 2 I want to be a little bit smaller. So I'm going to go ahead and say that's going to be 300 pixels. So I created an ID style for box 1, and I also created an ID style for box 2. Those IDs matching the IDs that I assigned to these 2 divs here, box 1 and box 2. And you know what I forgot to do? I forgot to close that opening statement off. So I went ahead and put in my closing divs. And now you're going to see this box is now smaller than this box. So you can use these ID styles to position and arrange your different boxes. There are lots of different positioning properties, and again, that CSS series will go into detail about what's called the CSS box model that talks about padding and margins and width and positioning. Lots of good stuff in that series. And this is just meant as an overview. But for right now, I want to do one more thing to this box 2. I want to set the left margin of this, so I bump that over a little bit. So I'm going to do margin dash left. And just as the name would imply, that sets the left-hand margin for box 2. And I'm going to go ahead and say that it is 40 pixels. I'm not typing very well. And again, I end that with a semicolon. And when I click over here, you can see that now has some left-hand margin on it. It's bumped that 300 pixel box over by 40 pixels. So that's just, again, a brief overview of writing CSS. Just to review, the first thing we did was we created the CSS file, and then we went into the source code And using the link tag, we went ahead and attached that style sheet to this HTML page. Then, using a combination of tags, classes, and IDs, we were able to create rules in our CSS file that formatted and positioned the different elements on our page. So that's, again, just a brief overview of CSS. When we actually get back into the project in our next video and we start creating real CSS rules for a real page, you're going to see quite a bit more about CSS. But that should give you just a basic overview. And again, what I want you to take away from this video is the fact that you need to be able to attach a CSS sheet to an HTML file, and that CSS files contain rules. These rules are either associated with tags, classes, or IDs. After you have the name or the selector, and that's what H1P, Bob, Box2, those are called selectors. After you've typed the selector, you do an opening curly bracket followed by a closing curly bracket. One very common mistake people make when they're writing CSS is they use the square bracket or they use parentheses. These are the curly brackets, the kind you used in math. And they're on the square bracket key, so that can get a little bit confusing just to the right of the P key on your keyboard. But you're going to do an opening curly bracket and a closing curly bracket. And then you're going to put a series of one or more statements inside of that CSS rule that format or position your element. In this case, I have 3 rules in the CSS statement. Our CSS statement is composed of a property and a value for that property. And most of the property names are fairly self-explanatory. Font family sets the font. Font size sets the font size. You might expect font-color to affect the font color, but that's just simply the color option. If we want to specify the width of something, we do width. If we want to specify the left-hand margin of something, we do margin-left. If we wanted to specify the right margin of something, we do margin-right. So again, most of the properties are fairly self-explanatory. And when we actually get into the next video and you start creating these rules for real, you'll see how that works in. And again, I have that other series on CSS that goes into detail about writing CSS. So that's all for this video. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next video.